Hello, welcome to more or less an interview with my good friend and colleague, Arteaga, who is a senior associate and economist over at LinkedIn. I am Kent Oliver Bupathy, founder and lead faculty at Epsilon Executive Education. Mardocheo also goes by Marc. He is going to be one of our guest faculty in the professional certificate program in AI and ML. Marc, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Kent. Happy to be here.
So I'll just dive right into it. I've known you for just so long, but a lot of people here may not know you and they want to understand what you are excited to bring to the table, but let's just let them get to know you. So to begin, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do today?
Absolutely. So, as Kent alluded to, I am a senior economist at LinkedIn. I have a PhD in economics from Fordham University. My research interests was on how households form expectations about the economy and how those expectations shape what they do. At LinkedIn, I work specifically on the marketing science team, which in plain terms, I am a go-to person who answers the question, did this actually work or would it have happened anyway? I am the only PhD economist on a team of data scientists and marketers and just applied analytics practitioners. So my job is partly technical, but I would also say partly translation. A lot of the work that I do actually goes in front of clients and other executives within the company that really are looking for guidance on what it is that they should do next. And so, again, a lot of the conversations are about can it be, does it come from a very technical background? Like, can we stand by it? Do we really like what we're trying to say and can we really trust it? But then also like, what is this impact and what's going to happen downstream? Most of my career, I think, has been in the same question, just in different clothes. In the past, I used to be at a central bank where those kinds of questions were about interest rates. I was also in consulting for a while where questions ranged from infrastructure to just financial products. But now it's all about advertising. And so the question is always for me, what did this cause? Is this actually true? And what are we going to do about it? And that's the kind of real strategic thinking, if you will, that I am excited to think about as in this particular context.
No, I really appreciate that. And that really is kind of like a deep background. So, you told us a little bit about what your work at LinkedIn involves, but you are on a data science team, and data science used to be called applied statistics for the longest time. Then it migrated over into data science. And now in this world of AI, a lot of people wonder what is still the role of data science? Yet you are at a major American company, a global company, sorry, and
Oh.
you're on a data science team. So can you tell our audience and tell our prospective students, like, how do you use data, machine learning, and even AI technologies in your everyday data science work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I think there's three layers to this. They're not all necessarily equally important all the time, but I'll just bear with me, right? So I think the core usage of data or data science, at least for the work that I do, a lot of it is in causal inference, right? Causal inference from the advertising world really takes its shape by using randomized experiments to try to understand if we did something and if we didn't do something, are the outcomes going to be the same? When you can't do something randomly, for instance, then we do like quasi-experimental designs. And you might have heard of some of these topics, such as, or these modeling approaches like difference in differences, or using synthetic control methods, regression discontinuity, things like that. A lot of that, I would call that as the intellectual work, if you will. Machine learning, which is, I feel like all these words, like some of them are buzzwords, some of them are just like interchangeable. But machine learning, I'd
Yeah,
say it's also
very,
a,
they blend together, don't they?
they really do. And I would say machine learning is also kind of like another supporting tool. Causal inference, machine learning, a lot of these things are support tools, not necessarily the only answers that exist. But machine learning, in the traditional sense, or the way that perhaps you and I maybe use it, I use it for the pieces where prediction genuinely is the task, right? Where we're trying to
Hmm.
classify things, mostly unstructured text. You know, you alluded to how large the company is. I mean, the LinkedIn feed is just an interesting place where a lot of people post a lot of really interesting business related things, but also we've seen a lot more growth in the creator space recently. And a lot of it is relatively unstructured text in a way
Hmm.
that, we're trying to understand what people we're talking about. So we use machine learning to build, let's say, things like propensity scores or to process social listening data at scale. Sometimes machine learning helps us understand who is likely to convert to do something, maybe become a lead from a sales perspective or answer a certain advertising question a certain way, or perhaps be more likely to apply to a certain type of job. And so, because machine learning is able to tell me those kinds of things, to tie it back to the causal inference piece, it's not going to tell me whether or not something did cause that conversion, right? And so, those two are different objects where I would say that the data science or the causal inference piece and the machine learning piece kind of complement each other. You talked about AI and like large language models. I think that LLMs in general, or just AI, can be a giant workflow accelerator, whether it be in code or literature triage, like reading through a bunch of like literature and instructions and like maybe like research, helping you clean and structure data sets that otherwise would be too onerous to do. Also,
Hmm.
drafting, I would say, huge component. Because we're owned by Microsoft, we're always constantly like using Copilot and stuff to like understand or like help us draft things and understand like what happened during meetings. I'll give you an example of something that I
Please.
used something recently, not necessarily related to the job that I do, but actually related to the blog that we write, where I built a data set of every Federal Reserve policy statement going back to about 25 years, and I
And one second,
analyzed.
just for those of
Yeah.
in the audience who are here in the pan-India context, the Federal Reserve is the United States' central bank. Most countries do call it a central bank, but the United States likes to be a little more unique and call it a Federal Reserve. Mark, take it away.
Yeah, for sure. You're absolutely right. I'm just realizing that now. I used to work for the Central Bank of Chile. Same exact thing. Everybody does call it a central bank, but for some reason we are calling it something different here. Regardless,
That
think
and the
about.
freedom units.
Ah, right, of course. But so regardless, you can imagine that like as people or as these banks, Federal Reserve or central banks are putting out statements about where they're thinking policy is going to go, I was kind of curious about how the length of those statements are changing or have changed over the last 25, 26 years. One of the main reasons being so is that in the US, there's a new central bank chairman or the chief of the central bank. And it's a lot of it has changed about how he is speaking to the press and speaking to the public about where he thinks or where he's thinking the policy is going to go. Maybe a couple of years ago, when we were just doing research, that probably would have taken weeks to do. Now,
Mhm.
using LLMs, that is a 30-minute task, if that. It's mostly about like kind of think of the right question to do it. And so I think that there's a lot of really interesting research questions that you can tackle and maybe more of in like applied settings, for instance. It's like, does advertising change depending on what an AI model is saying about your brand? That's been a huge question on my mind lately. It's been some of the blog posts that I've been writing because if you are asking an AI model like, hey, what is the best thing to do? Or what is the best chair to buy? What is the best microphone to buy? Is marketing actually moving that answer? And I think that there's some interesting causal inference questions or attribution questions where we have to think about identification strategies to truly understand how AI is changing not just the accessibility to information, but how it's also changing the way we're getting that information and what's
Mhm.
influencing that. So I guess to go back to the point of between ML and causal inference and AI and stuff like that, maybe the honest note here is that maybe 70% of the job with any of these is to define the question and then, of course, preparing the data. I think the modeling has become such a fast part of the process now. It really is
Mhm.
about the setup and the interpretation.
Yeah, you can't have good modeling without good data foundations, and the model doesn't go anywhere unless you know how to sell the output. So, and it's great to hear how you have engaged across your career and even still today, even at a more senior level of work product, you still have a hand in all those different levels. And that's a really encouraging thing for those who are coming to us from so many different backgrounds at so many different career levels. but let me jump into another aspect here. Many of our many of our prospects are interested in AI and machine learning or the combination of the two because they're looking for a career advancement in one way or another, whether it's maybe a promotion at their company, maybe joining a different department at their current company, or just switching companies or even industries entirely. Now, as you've mentioned, you've worked in banking, consulting. You're currently in the tech space. How did your career move across these different areas? And did your technical level have anything to say about that?
Yeah, no, fun. Yeah, interesting question. I often think about that because I think for a lot of folks, as they hear my background, it's not exactly like super obvious to make those kinds of jumps. I maybe can give a little bit of context too as to what I was doing at each.
Please.
So my first piece in undergrad was actually working for a bank. I was doing risk modeling, like risk analysis, like understanding what's going to happen, with risk wise. And I had a couple internships here and there during graduate school. My first big role was at the Central Bank of Chile. I was working on macroeconomic systems that were under real pressure at the time. This was during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we were thinking about interest rates, we were thinking about monetary policy and the way that other countries' monetary policy was going to impact the Chilean economy specifically. At KPMG or in economic consulting, I was building models for a variety of clients. This was like client agnostic in a way. So anywhere from healthcare companies to state governments to infrastructure companies who were dealing with like creating railroads and understanding the aspects of that, to banks who became clients of ours, thinking about do we create this kind of product or do we do an underlying like risk assessment on this? And at LinkedIn, it's now very different, right? Like thinking about advertising and the effect of advertising on people's ability or inclination to purchase something or to make a decision based on like the influence that a video might have on them.
Hmm.
And what people are talking about on a professional platform. And is that changing? Can we tap into that? Can we understand how the network effect between professionals is leading towards an outcome. And so
Hmm.
while the sectors kind of look unrelated, I think that the underlying problems never change because it's always about someone spending some sort or some degree of money or some sort of money changing hands, and they wanted to know what would happen if they do it, right? So in a central bank perspective, you might call it policy transmission. So for instance, you might want to change the rate and want to see what the transmission of that policy might be. In consulting, you might call it economic impact. If you build this, what happens? And in tech companies, we call it incrementality. So if you spend money on this advertising, what is your incremental reach or what is your incremental conversion rate, for instance? And I think that it's the same identification problem but with three distinct vocabularies. Your point of like, oh, does it need to be all technical all the time? I don't think that my ability to have gone from one to the other and then now to the third one is just based upon the technical rigor of the work
Hmm.
that I bring to it. I think that now actually it's a great time to enter some of these more technical fields because AI has made it cheaper in a way, cheaper from a cognitive level to be able to just hey, I want to talk about this data problem and I want
Yeah.
you to help me model this, or I want you to help me understand that. So I don't think that that is actually getting more expensive. What is becoming more expensive and what I think allowed me to jump between all these sectors is the piece that comes after it, which is what I call the burden of translation, is
Mhm.
understanding what the policy transmission means. Like, what are the second order effects of the decision that you're making, second, third, fourth order effects of the decisions that you're making? And how does that come back to the decision makers who are currently looking at you as the analyst or the practitioner or the data scientist? They're looking at you for you to be able to discern that for them. And so I do think that burden of translation and understanding what is the strategic decision that people are making from the model that you're running. It's not enough to just give the answer. Obviously, you want the answer to be correct. I mean, we'd be out of jobs if we don't give correct answers or if we don't give good
Yeah.
guidance on that part. But it really is about what comes from that. I can't tell you something is just 10%. Well, what does that mean for me in the business? Or what does that mean for me and my clients? What does that mean for me and my policy? And so I do think that it's not necessarily important to optimize for industry per se. I think we should be optimizing for a class of problems that that you want to be good at, because the industry is probably going to change several times for you, as it has for me. But the problems themselves will not. And your ability to translate and be an effective communicator about what you're translating also is not going to go away.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. It's so important for people to hear that it's just possible. Still, so many ways of working, ways of thinking about, I graduated college, I did the right thing, I got a job, and maybe I just stick to it. But now with the cheapening, not in terms of lesser quality, but just the cheaper access to information and technicality, as you spoke about, means that people now have more options. And you gave a lot of great anecdotes from your own working history on how people can do that, but also think about these skills. Data, whether you call it like data science, machine learning, or artificial intelligence, there is a universality to these skills. They can be applied in so many different contexts. It just takes, a little bit of, grit, perseverance, and creativity to see how you can do that. But you can. And then, of course, you tied it all together with the fact that without proper communication to actually sell how these different outputs make sense, it is just cheap information rather than meaningful work product. So no, thank you for giving us so much of that richness. I now want to take it to Epsilon's programs themselves because you are a guest faculty, and we're really excited to have you in that capacity, bringing all this knowledge into different ways. Whether it's one module that we have on the data side or the modeling side, AI tools and extensions, or even their capstone project, for example, which topics or modules are most exciting to you to teach the Epsilon cohort?
Absolutely. I think they're all great. First of all, let me just start by saying that, because I think that it's a good idea to be as well rounded with some of these topics that Epsilon is currently trying to impart amongst the students. I think that for me, it would be both the beginning and the end piece, frankly. The analytical engine and also the strategic voice modules, which I think are extremely important. I mean, you can't really do any of this without having some sort of basis within data, prediction, and causality, understanding how to manipulate data, how to think in a data way. In fact, when we were in grad school, there was a professor who was very known for saying, picture a matrix, like try to envision the matrix in your brain, in
Hmm.
your mind, and then like try to do operations on the matrix. And like in some way, it almost becomes a little bit of a game, right? Like learning how to use some of these machine learning models, for instance, and like how do I interpret the output? It almost becomes like a puzzle in a way. Like I have a bunch
Yeah.
of data. A lot of the times it's unstructured. And it's good to kind of, to help move you from just thinking about like, oh, maybe think more basic statistics related things, such as like correlation or, looking at like moments of data, like averages and stuff, to more clearly thinking about measurement and causality and how you can test and like all these business impacts that it's going to have. So I would say that the analytical engine, I think, is something you cannot get away with. And that is more, I think, more on the start. I would say towards the end of pieces, the strategic voice aspect, having leadership, having authority, being able to defend the way that you're doing things is equally as important. And I would say if you want your voice to go far, that is really what you want to hone in on. And then, this takes time. I think the modules are a great place to learn about them. But really, your own voice and your own ability to defend the methods and the choices that you're making will come with experience.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, learning how to explain the technical work that you're doing in a language that makes sense in the context of where you work is extremely important. And also remember, I think I mentioned this idea of like the burden of translation. And I do think the burden of the translation rests with the people who have the knowledge, for instance, the analytical engine background, or the advanced AI operations background. That translation piece does rest on you. You are the person that people are going to hire to answer the questions and be able to bring it back to the actual context of the problems and the solutions and in the business that hopefully you can move something with. And I do think that does come with time. There's great things that you can learn, and being out in the field, I think, will also give people the right confidence and the ability to say, you know what, this is the right context. This is how I should speak to this stakeholder. This is how I should speak to this person who I need to convince. In many ways, you can also kind of think of it as a game in a way, where you yourself are the source of truth and you want other people to also believe that source of truth. That does start with credibility and knowing what you're doing. But there is a huge part of it that I think that is often not as played up in most programs, at least that I've seen in the past, where you do have the emphasis only on the technical aspect of it. There's a lot to be said about being able to be confident about what you're saying, and also being able to convince other people, hey, listen, this is what I've done. This is the context by which I did it. And here is like all my proof. Here's my evidence. This
Hmm.
is my recommendation moving forward. Like it's okay to put your professional stamp on recommendations. It's not just, oh, I think we should do this, or like, I guess that maybe this might be the right answer. As a professional, you should be able to use your strategic voice to say, this is my recommendation as a professional. This is my
Hmm.
recommendation as a data science practitioner.
No, that's incredibly helpful. And once again, this is why we are so happy that you want to be a part of the Epsilon faculty, because these are the perspectives and backgrounds and knowledge shares that matter to people, especially leading into the last question. Why the last question? Because, well, everyone watching, Marc is coming to us right now from New York City, the Big Apple. It is late there, early morning here in New Delhi, India. So I want to be cognizant of his time and attention. So, building off what you were just talking about, right? So, and then relating it to your career, we're going to kind of come a little full circle here. Yes. Epsilon Executive Education. We are in the business of making sure we can upskill working professionals the right way with good governance, strong foundations, and also giving them a voice in this world where it's all about human in the loop. How do we make use of these technologies? Either related to that or different than that, please answer as you understand it best. What advice would you give working professionals, many of whom coming to Epsilon are less technical, who want to use AI in their careers? And AI, by the
Yeah,
way, can also include, of course, machine learning under the umbrella. I want to be fair to you.
yeah. No, that's very fair. Thank you for that. Okay, so I think I'm going to give 5 points because hopefully one of the five is going to land and maybe like, I don't know, get stuck in your brain or something like this. So,
I'll do my best.
yeah. So, okay, let's start with one. So, I do think, as I've alluded to in the previous answers, I don't think that the skill or the scarce skill is model fitting, right? As we've mentioned, AI has made the technical layer somewhat, it's kind of collapsing in of itself. It's kind of cheap, right? We
Hmm.
can go to any AI model and it's fine. Like they can probably help us figure out some sort of modeling or technical question. But what hasn't become cheap is knowing which question is worth asking and knowing when your answer is wrong. Because as we know, AI models are very convincing. And I think
Yeah.
that comes with domain knowledge, which a lot of the folks, I'm guessing, already have if they're working somewhere that, requires them to be just immersed in their industry or immersed in their
Yeah.
field. And if they don't have it, part of the reason they're probably here with Epsilon, right? I would say the second piece is let's think about from a technical aspect, if you do want to learn how to kind of like work with AI and work with code, learn how to use basic querying languages like SQL, for instance, because a lot of the job is getting the right data. And it doesn't necessarily have to be SQL. I'm just saying, like, trying to
Yeah.
understand and get the right data, I think, is the first step. Enough Python, I think, or enough modeling or scripting language in order to just be able to think in these kinds of kind of like modeling techniques. As I
Hmm.
mentioned, like, if you can visualize a matrix, can you also think in a systems capacity? Can you think about what an algorithm that you need to apply, for instance, to data? Can you come that up with your brain? I think that might be really useful. Actually, a good book about causal inference or causal thinking, just a small plug here. Causal Inference, the Mixtape by a professor known as Scott Cunningham, I think is a great first step if you're thinking about causal inference. In terms of the third, I
Right
would say
here.
that, yeah,
Keep it
there you
always
go.
handy on the bookshelf. You're right. It's a staple.
I'm telling you, it's very readable. It doesn't have a ton of heavy math. I would say it's extremely accessible for anybody who wants to just pick it up and
And
really understand.
And the publisher, we actually do make use of this book in the program. So it actually is completely coincidental to people out there that Mark brought it up. He and I just happen to both be a fan. But the publisher actually does make a free version of the book online, so it makes it accessible to our students. But anyway, please take it away. I just always love when people reference the book.
You know what? He also has a podcast about it too. So if you're interested in podcasts and maybe books aren't your thing, listen to the podcast.
Good
Okay, so
deal.
for third, I would say in terms of using AI or LLMs, use it as a tutor. Please use it as a tutor, but do not use it as an oracle. Ask it to explain the same concept to you three different ways, because the third is going to click with you. Ask it to critique your reasoning, right? And then verify. Because
Hmm.
the failure mode is not that it's wrong, it's that it's going to be so confidently wrong in a way that you're not going to be able to detect if you don't understand the underlying idea. I would also say for folks who are coming from, again, specific industries, your domain knowledge is the moat by which you should like heavily proceed in whatever it is that you're doing. Because a generic data scientist is probably going to be able to fit any model on your data, but they're not going to be able to tell you if that number maybe looks strange in the context of what your domain knowledge is. If you compare your domain knowledge with, again, this technical literacy, I think people become hard to replace in that way. And then also, of course, being able to, talk to people about what it is that you're doing from a strategic perspective. And I would say my last suggestion for folks, particularly as they're starting out, maybe if you're still a student or you're just trying to pivot into careers, build something visible because a small analysis on maybe let's take public data, for instance, or if you're able to write it up clearly and convey something new. I know there's a lot of people who go out there on like Leet Code or maybe like they use like other like data repositories to like use the same data set and
Yeah.
look at like for instance the Titanic data set if you've ever heard of
Hmm.
that from like from like basic packages and stuff.
Or
Don't do
Iris.
that. Or Iris. Yes, of course. Classics, which are great and they have their time and place. But I'm talking about building something that's unique, that or you're able to write it up well, that you're able to say, hey, listen, like here's why people should care about that. Because people will take notice. I promise you, people will take notice. If you can prove that you can go from question to answer and all those steps in between, then that's something that nobody is going to be able to take away from you. And it's something that you probably can infer from a resume line. So do consider those as well.
Mark, this has been a real treat, not just because you and I can talk forever about any technical topic. It's why we have always been such good friends. But this, I think, is going to give so much value and additional context to our prospective students and those who have already signed up. So once again, thank you and good night, my friend.
Thanks you all. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.